Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. This episode is for anyone who's considered being a writer at some point in their life. It is something that I always intended to do and likely will do when I retire. The challenge is I don't know how to do it, how to make a business of it, how to profit from it. And today's guest, Paulette Perhach, has written a book, Welcome to the Writer's Life, How to Design Your Writing Craft. She teaches you how to write, how to make a business of it, and that's exactly what people who want to be a freelancer need in their toolkit. I hope you enjoy the show. Paulette, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Can we start our conversation?
No.
With what is motivating you in life right now? What are 2 or 3 key things on top of that you want to get across to the listeners today?
Abundance. I work really hard, and I've worked really hard for other people in my life, and I'm working hard enough to do well in the future. I can see it. It's coming my way. And I'm owning that, and I'm really excited for it. As a writer, we're not taught that we're allowed to want that or that will come our way at all. And to realize the value of storytelling in the world and our place here, and how I have as much opportunity to go after that as anyone else is really exciting.
Excellent. That's a great thing to talk about. It's one of my favorite things to talk about and comes up reasonably often on the podcast when we talk about the concept of an abundant mindset versus a scarcity mindset. And it seems too many people have that scarcity mindset.
Yeah. And, and beauty and awe and adventure. I gotta be able to buy those plane tickets to go see lava and go see the Northern Lights. And, the travel writing industry that I dreamed of when I was young, that I wanted to be a travel writer, has changed so much, and it's so much harder. And I really dreamed of that because I didn't think I would ever be able to afford to send myself on those trips. And so that was my hack. I'll be a travel writer. And with the changes in the industry and realizing that you can be an entrepreneur 20 hours a week and you can be a writer the other 20, and you can mix and match and make your own way, I'm really excited. I'm working so much on associating money and finances with positive things. And so really focusing on, hey, money can be a really beautiful thing.
And why is it, do you think, that so many people associate money with negative things?
Because we live in this super messed up world around money. So many people are operating in a way where they're literally happy to destroy the earth to get more money when they have more than they could probably spend in their lifetimes. And we've all, well, I don't want to say we've all, but I know I had very bad experiences with money when I was young. Money meant problems and trouble, and it was this thing that I couldn't figure out. It was the root of the problems in my life. It was the thing holding me back. It was the thing keeping me out. And so you just say I hate money. And I love this book, From Monk to Money Manager.
Okay.
He grew up in a very affluent but toxic money environment. And I'm lucky I grew up in a very loving but financially unstable house. And I would prefer it that way than the other way. And he became a monk to get away from money until his monastery went bankrupt. And then they literally had all the monks take out credit cards. And he had to help the monastery get out of debt and get out of bankruptcy. And he realized you can't escape money. You can't escape it. It's part of life. And I think he became a money manager. And I think we artists want to escape money, but money is just one form of value. in the same way that our work is valuable and it exists. We need it. And there's just no escaping it. So you might as well make friends with it and learn that the more you get, the more you can give. And, I just the other day spouted out this line that I wasn't expecting, but it really hit me. I said, when I support myself, I support the arts. And it's so true. Like, I am the arts and I'm going to take care of myself. And that's like, I started a meditation and free writing studio called A Very Important Meeting over the last year online. We meet, we meditate, and we get in lots of deep conversations after our writing session. We just talk for 15 minutes, but it's really helped me feel like just a drop in this ocean of creativity and gotten rid a bit of the ego. I mean, I don't want to, it's definitely still there. It's definitely riding along, but it's like we are all part of this really gorgeous aspect of human nature. I didn't choose for evolution to make artists, but it did. And there's a great book called Wired for Story that talks about the value of art and storytelling and why we're here. And so we're here as a part of that. And so when we support ourselves, we support that.
So one of the things you mentioned right there was the meditation and free writing workshop. And you do talk about meditation in your book as a way to help us increase focus and creativity. How do you think that meditation helps us do that?
I think I've always said, and actually something crazy happened this month. I am 39 years old, almost 40 years old, and I just got diagnosed with ADHD. And then I started looking into it and I was like, oh my gosh, like how did these pieces never come together previously? And so of course it makes sense that I started a meditation studio and also like developed this organizational tool for writers. I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So I always said, and I said in my book, you might have read, that my brain felt like it was dragging me like a wild horse that was just dragging me along. And then I feel like I learned how to saddle it, and use all that energy for good. And there's multiple ways that it helps with writing. I think firstly, it helps you to acknowledge when you are hearing the negative voices in your head. They're like, well, this sucks. Why are you even writing this? Blah, blah, blah. And then you can just be like, oh, excuse me, voice in the head, which I recognize because I meditate and I listen for you and I know how to control you. I'm just free writing right now, so you need to go sit in the corner and we'll come back to you when we're editing. Or, you can just recognize when your brain it's just learning to kind of step off the hamster wheel and look at the hamster wheel. And it's been incredible. I mean, I really recognize, I started tweeting out, there's a famous quote, we don't meditate to get good at meditation, we meditate to get good at life. And anytime I recognize that my emotions are like about to hit a peak, and I can bring it down, I tweet out something like, we don't meditate to get good at meditation. We meditate for when we have to go to the post office. And it's so true. Things like that, where you feel like this despair about your book, or you get wrapped up in the future or the past, and you can say like, oh, like I'm thinking right now, like these are thoughts. And one of the things I like to do in my meditation is to put what's called a soft label on your thoughts, your planning, or you're remembering, or you're judging, and I can be like, oh, this is judging. I'm totally judging right now. And just kind of accepting that it's there right now and then releasing it. And it's been incredible for me. I mean, we started it during quarantine, during a terrible, terrible time. And it's really been like the light of my quarantine, and it's totally helped me. And it's been great.
That's a wonderful, wonderful way to approach it. And we talk about ADHD a fair amount on the podcast as well. I was diagnosed with it in my 20s, and I've often looked at it as a bit of a superpower. And I also recognize it comes with a fair amount of challenges. And our youngest son is going through the process of getting his diagnosis right now. And there are some attributes that, now that you talk about it, as a writer, one of the things I've tended to notice is when you look at people who can visualize a story. So as you're reading a novel, you almost look at it and say, well, when I'm reading a fantasy novel, I'm actually in that world. I'm with the characters. I'm walking along. I'm seeing a movie in my brain. Most of the people I've tended to notice who have that ability to do that also seem to be some of the people who have high creativity and ADHD, from the limited use case that I've gone through. And for some reason, that for a lot of them, it makes them love reading.
Interesting. Yeah, you're 3 times as likely to be entrepreneurial, which makes sense. I'm an entrepreneur. I have lots of ideas. And it's been really helpful to kind of talk to my team about that and be like, oh, hey, okay, here's what we're dealing with here. Because when you own a company, your company is going to reflect the CEO. And so I can say to everyone else, like, okay, hey, this is why I need help finishing projects and, keeping track of things that bore me, because I like to create. Like, I want to create. I like the novelty. And so when things get to be like just banging it out, I can get bored and drop off. So that's a challenge.
So similar to writing, and we'll talk a lot about this because you spend a fair amount of time talking about just getting started. But then one of the problems you have that you bring up as well is for those of us who do just get started, it's not enough. We also have to finish. And if you're struck as someone who likes to start a lot of things, how do you ensure you finish those things, Paulette?
I have something I call fake outs, which are fake stakes to make you write and finish. And so one of the first things I did when I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was in Peace Corps, and there was this like Peace Corps talent show in 3 months. And I was like, I'm going to sign up to read a story. And I was in front of like 200 volunteers, which was bananas. So I worked really hard on the story for 3 months, and it made me finish. Like, you got to be a little scared. You have to be in a workshop with people you respect, or take a class or get a coach. I always have something going. And again, like with the novelty, sometimes they'll kind of like run their course, and then I'll find something else.
So let's take a step back, because we're diving into the book, but we haven't even gotten into telling the listeners what the book is yet. So when you wrote Welcome to the Writer's Life, what was your motivation, and who was your target demographic for reading this book?
Well, my motivation was having wanted to be a writer my whole life, really, and not seeing what it looked like and what I thought it was versus what it actually was when I moved to a larger city, to Seattle, and I just happened to move 6 blocks from a writing center. And I remember my friend at the time saying, oh, there's a writing center right around the corner. And I was like, what is a writing center? And so through Hugo House in Seattle, I was able to meet a lot of writers, take classes with writers, find myself in bars with writers, and just hearing what they said and how they lived. And, nobody looks as good as their author's photo, and nobody's as cool as their bio makes them sound, And so I was like, oh my gosh, like when you see the real thing, it's so different. And I really wanted to convey all the aspects, really I call it like freshman orientation for writers. It's just like, okay, here's where this is, here's where this is, these are these people, these are the awards you need to know, these are the places you need to know, here are the organizations that want to help you. From being a reporter in my early 20s, I am a really resourceful person, and I just love to like go out and be like, what all is out there? And so I have a map of writing centers. I have just the nuts and bolts of, you think it's all about being discovered, but it's really working to be worthy of discovery. And it's not, it can be 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. Sometimes that's how it feels.
That line you just said right there really jumped out at me. And I feel you emphasize this a number of times in the book. You said it's working to be worthy. And you talk a fair amount about taking action and just writing more. Can you take us through what that looks like and what you're suggesting to that person who says, I want to be a writer?
Yeah, I mean, you have to get a lot of really crappy words out there. And I was lucky. The first 2 books I found in our little Peace Corps library in the Capitol, where we had Peace Corps headquarters, was Bird by Bird and The Artist's Way, which are 2 fantastic classics. And so Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way talks about doing morning pages, which are just 3 pages of just blawing it out. And, some people say you need that 10,000 hours. Some people say you need 1 million words. But I think the thing is you just start to write and write and write. You write about your writing. You write about your life. And then you get bored enough of talking about what your schedule is for that day. And then you're like, well, there was this like story I had an idea for. Let me try that here. And then sometimes you get out a draft in your morning pages. So that's part of why we wanted to do a very important meeting. It's the writing time during a very important meeting is 45 minutes. And so that's kind of the amount of time we notice it takes to do morning pages usually. I'll try to use that for my morning pages usually. And yeah, it's just, I mean, I'm trying to write this novel and it has just been going on for so long. And I wrote 70,000 words of it in grad school, and then I threw those away and started over. And it's just like, it's so slow. But, you know, I knew someone in Seattle who wrote 2 full novels and threw them both away. And then his 3rd novel was published. And it's just like, oh my gosh. I mean, the amount of work it is just bananas. And so you have to see it almost as like a lifestyle rather than a thing you're doing. I jokingly say to myself, like, writing my novel is my lifestyle. I'm writing a novel. Like, will it ever be done? I don't know. But like, I'm just doing it. And I had to start getting up at 5 a.m. to do it. And I'm not happy about it. I never wanted to be that writer, but that's what I do now.
And, you know, not to be a Debbie Downer for our listeners, but so the writing, you realize when you get to the end of said book, that's just a small part of it. What's it like for the listener out there who's had their idea forever and they've spent, you know, the last 7 years around their 9 to 5 writing a book, and now they want to get it published? What's that journey like?
You have to find an agent, and then that agent will help you get it published, or you can self-publish it. And it really is, you know, it's marketing it, it's selling it, it's gathering your audience, it's finding your people, getting it out there. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. But I think the important thing is not to, you know, people can say, you know, I just want to write. And it's like, well, I just want to, you know, watch TV and read and write all day and look at Etsy and buy stuff on the internet. But you know what? We live in the real world, and we're so lucky, you know, especially with everything that's going on in Afghanistan right now. Like, I'm lucky someone taught me to read. I'm lucky I'm allowed to write. I'm lucky I'm allowed to say my thoughts. You know, I mean, when I started being a creative writer, I was living in a place where I saw a lot of suffering and a lot of people working their asses off for so much less than I got. And so that was like the ultimate, just shut up and do your work. Like, this is the deal. You know, it's not that bad. Yeah, we can always imagine something that's better, but that really, and that's not something I like say to other people, but internally that was my big like, oh yeah, well, you know, there's a lot of people who would like to have a bathroom break or a car, or, you know, like, no one said you have to be a writer. And so you just got to do that stuff, and it's not that big of a deal. And I think the earlier people just accept that and get and learn how it works and get to it, the better. And it's alongside your writing, and you have to be careful to balance the two. But if you want to make a living with your writing, if you want to get your writing out there, you know, I think there's something very beautiful about, I just write for myself and I don't really show anyone. Like, that's great. If that's what you want to do, that's great. You know, I wanted to make a living out of being a writer. And so I take on all the other stuff.
And, you know, talking about just getting your words on the page, which is something you say, you also had a beautiful example that I'm wondering if you can share with our listeners about clay pots and an experiment on quantity versus quality that may actually surprise the listeners. Can you share with them that?
Yeah, well, what's funny is that this experiment haunts me because I've just been working on this one novel forever. But basically, it was a class where the students were divided into 2 groups, and one had to work on one perfect piece of pottery all semester. And then the others had to just work on their quantity and just make as many pots as they could. And the ones who made as many pots as they could actually came out with a better quality than the people who supposedly were working on quality all semester with this one perfect pot. So it's just a good example of writing stuff and getting it out there. And that's why I love my blog. You know, I hate the word blog. I'm like blog and post, you know, but I like to just write stuff and get it out there, and write stuff and get it out there. When I'm playing the whole game of like, I took 10 years to write this essay and now I'm trying to get it in a really nice literary magazine and it takes them 6 months to get back to me and blah, 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 blah. It's so nice to have one outlet where it's just like every 2 weeks I write something and I publish it, and I write something and I publish it. And Some stuff's going to get a little bit of attention. Some stuff's going to get more attention. I'm a writer. The end. Like it's just so simple.
And how do you tie in what's going into the blog to what you're doing in the morning pages to the writing of your novel? Or is the morning pages just free flowing thought and then those other two are specific chunks of time that you focus on?
Yeah, I think it varies really. I think Julia Cameron's vision for morning pages is a little different. She was like, I believe, gosh, it's been so long since I've read the book, but she was like, just write it out and don't ever look at it again, right? But I'll be like, I'm writing 3 pages, like, I might write a draft or something, whatever is kind of on my mind at that moment. So I get up my alarm goes off at 5, let's say that. And then depending on how late I've stayed up watching terrible TV, I will snooze once or twice or 4 times. And then I get out of bed and I make coffee. And then that is my novel time. And then during a very important meeting, which I host in the mornings, I will do morning pages or some other kind of creative work. It's really funny because some people will talk about like, what is a thing that you should save a morning pages for? We all agree it is this kind of like sacred space for your writing, but some people are like, oh, I was doing like business writing, is that okay? And I'm like, we all have to decide like, what is the very important? It really is one of those quadrant 2 activities where it's like things that are important to you, but not urgent, right? Like no one's waiting for this. This is like your soul work, your artwork. That's the level that I try to be on in a very important meeting. So it varies. It's never cut and dried, it's never the same. There's never rules that I follow 100% of the time. I just try to be writing as much as I can.
And so with your writing, how do you define whether your writing is successful or not? And how does that tie into what you talk about in your book about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation?
Yeah, it's very interesting. When I had my piece go viral in 2016, that was like the biggest kind of, yay, success, hooray, this is fun. I love hearing from people about how the work affected them. I love working with editors who respect me as a writer, and I can tell they want to work with me. I feel successful when I'm doing that. I think really the feedback you get from readers is the biggest mark of success. It's really nice to be paid, and it's nice to get nice bylines. That feels really good. Because we're all wondering, like, am I good enough? Should I really be doing this? Am I in the right place? And when there are those kind of external signs that, yes, that the world appreciates your work, it does feel really good. But to me, that can be taken away at some point, and that you can't control that. So I just try to focus on the joy and really feel like when I crack myself up, or like just this morning, actually, I was on a very important meeting and I left my camera on so people could see me, and I was like laughing about something, and I realized like, oh my gosh, people are going to see me laughing. And I'm like, oh, that's good. Like my writing was cracking me up. I was writing a silly scene. So yeah, I mean, it's really, we're all going to be thinking those thoughts a few moments before we die at some point, and like, oh, how do we do? And I'm probably going to be like, wow, you spent more time on Twitter than I really would have liked. But
unless you like writing tweets, and
that's true, I do.
I'm not going to lie. I want to steal we don't meditate to get good at meditation. We meditate to, and then just stick in funny line. That just seems like a tweet that should go viral every day, and you could do a new one every single day. Sorry, I got excited by that potential Twitter. The difference between something you wrote, the difference between writers who give up and those who find success is this. Successful writers continue to work towards that which they don't have yet, even with the doubt, the rejection, and the grind. Can you take us through that? Is that part of what you were talking about earlier with just shut up and write?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm so big on the day-to-day lifestyle of it and how it feels day-to-day, because that's what's going to keep you through. It's like, are you enjoying it? And for me, such a big part of that is community. I just love writers. We're insecure and we're like, would you read this for me? But we're funny and we're doing it. We're not just like blowing through life. We're like, I'm actually going to try to do this thing that's really hard that I don't have to do at all. And so for me, I like to surround myself with writers as much as possible, have my writer friends, and really make writing enjoyable. I have my silly little mugs, get the nice candle, get your good pens, the Pilot G2, obviously. and, and just have that be the thing. And then anything else on top of that is the gravy. It can be really hard to stay in that place, but we try, right? And I think that's really important. And to have that vision of like, this is where I'm going, and to have faith that if you do the work, you will get better.
So how do you recommend people set up those habits, rituals, routines, so that writing is first and foremost in their day to have the daily habits?
I think there are three major things. The first is the fake outs that I mentioned, and having goals and having kind of public declarations, right? I'm going to go to this open mic night. I met Susie there. I'm going to meet Susie and we're going to do it. And my goal is to one day have the best story, in my opinion, at open mic night. That was one of my first goals. I started going to open mic night and I was like, my next goal is to have the best story at open mic night. My first goal was just to read a story out loud at open mic night. And second, to really share the goals and the habits with the people around you, not just the day-to-day, like, oh, hey, I should really be reading, but like to have the big conversation, like, hey, I really want to start taking this seriously. What do you think would work for our time? I once had a partner I would joke with where I was like, listen, I need you to play video games for at least an hour every day after work. And he was like, okay, I will do this for you, And that was, I had a day job. I made myself come home, go straight into the office and write for an hour, because I knew if I took a pit stop at the fridge or in the living room, I was not going to go in there. So it was like, I got home and I was like, still working mode, right to the office and doing that. And then I think to find what you enjoy about it and to do the things that feel right and leave the things that don't feel right. I spent a really long time and I still have this piece of my mind that's like, you should be living in the woods on $50 a month and just writing. And I'm like, I'm obviously not that kind of person. I like to be in the center of things. I like to mix it up. I like to be in a city. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to the whole thing. I'm going to, really work hard to try to afford to live in Seattle. And also like, I have to keep my mind on my writing as well. And it's really tough, but it's fun. It's a fun challenge. And to just enjoy. There was some quote that I heard, and I've tried to look this up and I couldn't find who said it, but someone asked a painter, like, what do you need to be a painter? And he said, you have to love the smell of paint. And I loved that. Cause it is like, you have to love the act and the moment of writing. And some people are like, writers joke all the time about how much they hate writing, and it's just can be a lot. But, those moments where you surprise yourself and you're like, oh, like your own work brings you joy. That's so fun. When you read something and you're like, wow, this is done. And I know it's done because like I feel it, and you share it with people and you have that connection, and it's really awesome when you get in a community and you really start to feel happy for your friends when they get somewhere. It's like, that is a really beautiful thing. So making the lifestyle beautiful, I think, is the way to get there. And to know that like, success may come or it may not. And would you still do this if it didn't come? And that's hard. We all want that external. I am not a Zen monk. Like, that feels good when I get attention and when I get success, for sure. But on the deepest level, you have to kind of be willing to put in the work and say, like, come what may, this is something I love and I'm going to do this.
Something that struck me when you were talking there, you were mentioning you were working the 9 to 5, you were trying to write around it. And there was a line that you wrote about that I loved, which was, when you go the 9 to 5 route, you can often get away with mediocrity. But when you're trying to live two lives at once, one that makes money and one that feeds your soul, you have to become a magician. Can you tell us what you meant by that and why it's so much harder to try to blend the two worlds?
Well, firstly, we do not live, if you live in the United States, you do not live in a country that wants you to not work at a 9 to 5. Suddenly they're like, well, I mean, I recently had a piece in McSweeney's called My Personal Brand is I Don't Want to Die, about healthcare and about how hard it is to make it as a freelancer and to have health insurance. It's just like crazy. So the world wants you to sit in this box, this padded beige box under fluorescent lights, obviously a lot has changed during COVID. And I feel like people have realized during COVID, like, oh my God, that was terrible this whole time. It's like, yes, it was. And you have to figure out a way to buy yourself time because it takes so much time. You have to be reading. I would like to be reading for 2 hours a day. That's definitely not happening right now. And writing 2 hours a day. The writing part I'm getting in, the reading part I'm not, partially due to Succession and HBO and how much good TV there is right now. So that's not entirely my own fault. And my freaking telephone, which I'm addicted to. And the trick is to learn to make the most per hour that you can so that you can buy those other hours. I mean, I think if you can stop trading your time for money is a good idea, but also just thinking about becoming very valuable and to the market. Obviously, everyone's valuable as a human person. But I realized this when I worked with a bunch of sales guys at that 9 to 5 at a tech company, and these guys were wearing these ridiculous watches and they made so much money. I'm like, I don't want to know how much money you guys make, like for the love. But I was like, what if you could make as much as they make per hour, but work 10 hours a week? And so that's kind of my jam. And that's what I'm trying to do is really figure out through, entrepreneurship and different tactics, how to make the most per hour so I can buy time to be a writer. Other people, might have a partner that supports them. They might live very frugally. They might be an heiress to, some kind of fantastic family riches. That sounds great. I would have preferred that. But if you are not in those categories and you have to figure it out for yourself, it's really about how do I become as valuable as possible per hour, which usually the trick is that the key is to stop charging per hour so that people don't know that's how much you make per hour because no one wants to say oh my God, you make $200 an hour, and to learn about business and to learn how money works. And I think it's really cool, actually. It's been great. One of my clients is Kirsten Jordan, who is the first female cast member of $1 Million Listing New York, the reality TV show. And she's an incredible businesswoman, and I have learned so much from her, and I have stepped up because I'm working with her. And, I have a team now, and it's not this playing small, I'm just a writer. It's I'm doing this for my writing, and I am taking this that seriously that I'm setting myself up with a business for the rest of my life. And I feel like writers don't want to think about that. They don't want to think about the business side, but it's I do not want to be in a government facility retired. I want that autonomy over my life, which is why my coaching program is called Powerhouse Writers, because it is I want to help people have power over themselves and their own habits, over their careers and in their work. And that took me a really long time it's because I grew up feeling so powerless, and I felt so powerless early in my life. And to realize that writers are these incredibly powerful people. It's very cool.
Can we digress on this for a little? I know it's a little different than the main topic of the writer's life, but really it's what the writer's life ought to be. And so Powerhouse Writers for coaching, take me through it. What are you trying to help the writers become or change?
The writer they want to be. Yeah, the writer they want to be. I feel like the writer that I was this person who was kind of just meek and looking in the world please someone give me work, and oh, please someone publish me, and would you mind reading this, blah, blah, and it's stepping into your power and saying, I'm just going to learn about and incorporate in my life the things that make a person more powerful, and not in a, power hungry way. I think if someone's power hungry, they're not going to pursue the arts in the first place. It's not our problem. I don't think that writers have a problem being power hungry. We have a problem being powerless. And thinking we're powerless. And what's been so cool about watching $1 Million Listing this season with Kirsten on it is to see the role that story plays in sales, right? Literally making money. It's the J. Peterman catalog. It's, perceived value from the customer. Writers, we're magicians. Alyssa Washuta has a great line in it in her book, White Magic. She's look at these stories that I've turned into words for you. What a witch I am. Something like that. I am paraphrasing. I wish I had it right in front of me. But, we have the power to shape people's emotions, and emotions run the world. And so when you step into that and you look at the history of writing and how humans evolved to use it and to need it, you're like, wow, we really wield, when you learn how to wield story, you learn how to wield value and money. And there's so much that you can do with it. And to support yourself, not to say, I want a Ferrari, but to say, I don't want to be crying on the 30th of the month because I have no idea how the hell I'm going to pay rent. Those are the days I don't get my morning pages done, because I'm worried about money. I'm freaked out about how I'm going to make it. And, I have this idea called a lemonade stand. And it's like, if you had to make money today, literally you need money today, what would you do? And I did it first 3 years ago. And I made $80 that day by going around on Mother's Day and taking family photos, like offering people family photos in the park. Literally just me, took my camera. I'm a photographer, professional photos, $20. And after getting a business education and building my brand and not being afraid to toot my own horn and build my, audience a little bit, I needed to do that again. And this summer I was like, because in Seattle, around August, you're like, ooh, I need to work. I need some money. So I did it in August and I made $4,000, and I was like, damn, that's the difference of knowing what to do in business and to have yourself set up as a business.
And what did you change in August? What did you do differently?
I ran a sale on my coaching, but it's the same thing. If you have any kind of mailing list and offering, you need some sales, you run a sale. And so, yeah. So I offered previous coaching students a discount, a deep discount, and got a bunch of new coaching clients. It was great. Or got a bunch of re-ups. And I absolutely love my coaching clients. It was really fun to work with people again.
And how long have you been doing that side of things now?
3 years now. I was just looking. I've had 36 coaching clients.
Well, that's great. It's long-term, one of the avenues that I want to pursue. So I love hearing how people get into it and how they approach it, what their strategy is. And, love it. You also, before I digressed us onto Powerhouse Writers Coaching, you were talking about wanting to read 2 hours per day. And one of the things you talk about is reading being the second half of writing. Why is that?
It's so inspiring. I mean, inspiring to me is like, it makes me want to write. And when I'm reading, you could almost take it as a writing assignment. Anything you read, right? I was thinking about this as a blog post that I wanted to do where, let's say you read Great Gatsby. And think about what would be the writing assignment that produced Great Gatsby. Write about someone who doesn't get what they want. Very simplistic, right? And then you go and say, write your story about someone who doesn't get what they want, fiction or nonfiction. One of the things I do actually in my website, welcometotherwriterslife.com, is I offer a free year of writing prompts, a daily email to help people, and a little like message each morning, because, that's the thing that we're all doing. And to read it and to feel it is just it just makes you want to make that and play with that medium. George Saunders is the writer who most makes me want to just go write.
George Saunders. What does he write that you love so much?
He writes nonfiction and fiction.
He does both.
He does both. He wrote a great craft book, and he's just like this.
So the nonfiction is on writing.
On writing. He's also, I first discovered him writing, he wrote a long article about Clinton. And yeah, he's just a very sweet, kind person, kind of walking through this world with Buddhist slippers on, not trying to mess too much up and trying to be kind. And it was funny. I wrote about him in my book a little bit, and he had said something at a talk I wanted to quote. And he was on a plane that I was on from London to Italy. And I had written in the book already, don't just go up to famous writers and scream, I love you. And what do I do when I see George Saunders in first class? Pretty much like I hold it together for a few minutes, but then I basically just was like, I love you. And I was like, damn it, I'm going to have to edit my book. And then when we landed, his wife was in the bathroom. And so he was trapped. He couldn't leave. And so I proofed my book with him. And I was like, I just need to confirm this quote from one of the talks you gave. And he was very nice about it. And then I left him alone, but it was really funny. He's just a very sweet person.
I love that. That's such a great way to do it.
Yeah.
So how do we find the right reading to inspire the type of writing that we want to do? And something else that you wrote about, what's the importance of ensuring that we let all the voices in?
Yes, it's very important. So after George Floyd was murdered, I was like, I want to dedicate a year of my just like leisure reading to Black authors. And that was almost like delving into science fiction where the world you know is not the world you know. If you read Black authors for a year, you see the United States in a completely different way. And you're like, holy shit, like this has existed my entire life, but it has not been my point of view. And to just see that point of view kind of over and over and over. N.K. Jemisin was one of my favorite authors that I discovered during that time. Sam Irby, I already loved. She's the funniest. And trying to think of, oh man, this one author had me waking up at 4 a.m. being like, I don't think I should be a writer. And then I was like, she's a real writer. I'm not a writer. And my friend was like, no, if you're not as good as her, it's okay. She's like the best of the best. It was a Hurricane Katrina book. It's driving me nuts. I'm Googling Hurricane Katrina novel. Oh God. Jasmine Ward.
Jasmine Ward. Okay.
Yeah, she's the best.
And so how will diversifying our reading and the authors that we're choosing impact our writing?
I think it's important to understand the traditions that we come from. And for example, magical realism is really a South American tradition, right? And to not just, this is where people say like, you can't just pick and choose what you use. There's cultural appropriation to consider. There's certainly different points of view and understanding where you are being cliche. Someone said there was a Black author who said like, if Black writers describe the skin tone of white people, and it was like, I touched her mayonnaise white skin, and it was like so funny. So I think it's just important to know, we've all been raised. I was raised in the 80s in Florida. Like, I got a lot to learn, and I think just acknowledging we all have a lot to learn, and the publishing industry is so white. It's like 95% white, which I think has a lot to do with if you come from a family where you're supporting your parents or you're supporting other people, being a writer is really hard. If you literally will be homeless if you can't pay your bills, being a writer is really hard. So tie that with the oppression in our country, financial and otherwise. And you have things like, what happened with American Dirt. And so it's just reality. It's just getting in touch with reality, which we haven't had delivered to us our entire lives because the media and the books and the shows overwhelmingly come from a white point of view. And you really have to make the effort to bring other voices into your mind. And some great organizations who support writers are Kundiman, Vona Voices, and Lambda Literary. And I think just following these accounts, following their writers, reading the people who win the awards, you'll just get more in touch with the real. And then that will help you create your writing from a place of reality rather than this kind of, hall of mirrors that I described it as in the book. And I say that as someone who had to be educated in that. And, certainly like will be learning for the rest of my life and will be undoing and unlearning. And, America, like you want to get started, read, Cast with a Caste. And, the Underground Railroad read that last year. And yeah, it's the history of this country is so much uglier than anyone wants to talk about.
I try not to comment on it too much as a Canadian, but it's always very interesting to observe from the outside.
Take me with you. Will you marry me, Clint? I need health insurance.
Come on up to Vancouver. We're just across the border.
I love Vancouver.
It's also interesting because looking at it from an outsider, it also strikes me that it's still the greatest country in the world. Right? It's somewhere that so many people would give everything to live there. So of course, everything can always be better. And it's pretty darn good in a lot of ways. I mean, if we could fix the I don't know if I want to say what I think we should fix, but some of the things you've been talking about, healthcare. I don't know how you stand on guns, but it feels like there's maybe a little room to fix that a little.
Maybe there's a little bit of room for not having as many guns. Yeah. And what strikes me as a writer is that the thing that is the war right now is the story. What is the story of the United States? What is the story of the world? And we have these like 2+ competing stories. And I don't think there has to be a country that's like the greatest country in the world because we have incredible opportunities right now, but like those incredible opportunities scratch below the surface and you find a lot of dead bodies under there, you know? And so it's like, yes, it is true that in this day and age, there's a lot of opportunity in the United States. Yes, it is also true that it's built on genocide. And so like what now is the big question. And so you can't ignore that anymore. Not that we ever should have, but I think with the introduction of the internet and there was this kind of dissolving of the gatekeepers as far as social media goes. And so then all these other voices were allowed to emerge. And so we hear what they're saying now and we're like, oh, okay, wow. All right. Yeah.
It's unbelievable to have seen over the last 18 months the things that we've watched on television simply because people have cell phones. And so there's no hiding anything. And what's scary is we're probably at the most tolerant period we've had in most of the world. And yet we're seeing what we're seeing. So just to imagine what it must have been like 10 years ago. Like the iPhone's only 13 years old. So 13 years ago, no one saw anything.
Well, one of the craziest things that I learned from CAST was they used to send postcards from lynchings. I was here. Like, yeah, it was just, yeah. I mean,
I have to read that one now. That is disturbing.
Oh gosh, it's really rough.
So what do you say to someone who says, I want to be a writer?
Don't do it.
But I'm just not good at it. Right? Someone who just has no confidence in what they're putting on the page, but it's what they want to do.
Nobody has any confidence. Yeah, everyone feels like crap. Nobody has confidence. It's you just can't know if you're good at it yet until you actually try to do the thing. I said I'm going to give it 2 years and I'm going to submit 1,000 stories, or not like 1,000 stories, but I'm going to do 1,000 submissions. And so I took out my Writer's Mission Control Center, which has now evolved into a Google add-on that I sell to help writers stay organized. But I opened a spreadsheet and numbered it 1 to 1,000 and said, okay, I'm going to do this for my submissions and then we'll see, right? So kind of decide what's the period of time that I'm willing to give it a go and see. And then don't question it during that time. You know, that was the thing. I was like, I don't want to wake up every day and be like, should I write? Should I even be a writer? I joke that the question in workshops is like, not like, do you like the story? It's like, should I quit writing? Right? Because we all have those, we all wonder. And so I think it's just like, give it a go, give it a real go and see if you love it.
And you mentioned in their Mission Control Center, and you've talked about the importance of putting the time in. One of the things that gets in all of our ways, whether it's HBO, Netflix, Disney streaming, Amazon streaming, Apple TV streaming, it's getting a little out of control. What is the mission control, and how do you suggest that writers manage their time and get on top of it?
Yeah, so I have a 2-hour class called You've Got to Get Your Writing Life Organized, which all makes sense now that we know I have ADHD. But during that, I talk about the Writer's Mission Control Center, and it's essentially your one source of master information. Here's all my list of my story ideas and my stories and things I've had published. Here's all my contacts that I know. Here's all my submissions, which is so important to track. Here are the books I want to read that are on my list or that I have read, things like that. Here are my opportunities. And it's just so that you don't have everything all over the place. You have it in one place, because the actions we do as a writer produce data. We don't use the word data in writing very much, but it's true. So for example, if I get a story accepted and I know that I've sent it to 10 other places, I need to go to those other 9 places or 10 places and withdraw it. Because if, the New Yorker accepts it, which definitely has happened, if the New Yorker accepts it and then Granta also wants it, also something that's definitely happened, and I say, oh, sorry, Granta, the New Yorker already picked it up, Granta's going to be like, she's unprofessional and we're not accepting her stories anymore. And we're mad that we wasted our time on that, right? So it's the kind of thing where you need to know what you're doing. It's like any other business. That's what I realized. It's like any other business. Once I was like, oh, I'm a business owner. Like I've got to do marketing. I've got to do accounting. You have like your business divisions, departments, even if you're just submitting your stories. It can be that, for some people, it's very simple. I write poems and I send them out. You still need to track where your submissions are, and you should probably still have a place where all your notes are, right? Where do you write your notes down? Is it all over the place and you find them when you're sweeping? Or is it in a few, what Dave Crenshaw calls gathering places? And you're like, okay, if I have a story idea, I only put it in my phone's notes and I write SI : and that's how I can search my phone's notes when I want to process and put them all in my Writer's Mission Control Center. Or is it like your mom comes over and says, hey, I saw this receipt that says man hugs a turkey, then shoots it. Is this yours? And you're like, oh yeah, that was a sad Thanksgiving story I had that I want to do. Sorry. And we all start out as that example, right? Where we're like all over the place. And then we're like, this is just bananas and I've got to get it organized. And so that's what I try to help writers do so that you can use your brain for the actual creativity and the writing.
You just reminded me of a turkey tweet that I'm trying to write.
Better get on it. It's September.
About how, the turkey thinks that his boss loves him right up until the end, right? So how should you be thinking about work? Anyway, it'll get more refined as we go. But that brings up an important point, because you talk about the importance of always having tools to gather your thoughts. So what do you use? What are your techniques? And what do you suggest that people use that they can capture, that they can easily get it back into mission control?
So I have my main notebooks. I use a 5-star, 5-subject notebook, which just means it's like the bigger, thicker ones. When I get done with it, with each day, I put the date. And then if there's like a major story that I work on, I'll write it in the top right corner and put a circle around it. And what I find is that then when I'm flipping through it, I don't have to look on either side. It's always in the right-hand corner. And if it's like on the left page, I'll just like draw an arrow. And when I have read the page over and maybe typed up what I want to type up in there, if there is anything, and it's not just a rant about, a friend or something, I'll put a check mark in the corner. And I love my label maker. I have the P-Touch Cube. It's amazing. And it's the Brother P-Touch Cube. And I'll put a label on it, Seattle, January 1st, 2020 to September 1st, 2020, something like that. So, and then I have them like stored. Now I have a huge Tupperware bin of notebooks. And for ideas, I will either use my phone's voice memos if I'm on the move, the notes in my phone, the notes app, and I'll put SI if it's a story idea, or I'll put novel if it's something for my novel. And this is something I do on planes. Almost every time I'm on a plane, the thing I end up doing is like clearing out my notes. And I'll just search novel, and then I can find all my notes for my novel, or SI, and then all my story ideas. And then I have an admin notebook that I carry around with myself that's a little bit smaller. Now that I'm going to go from an iPhone 7 with a hugely cracked screen held together by tape to an iPhone 13. I'm so excited. Oh my gosh. And I watched the Apple presentation and I saw iPad. This could also be an iPad. For now, I just have a regular notebook and I take notes in here. And then anything that's a to-do, I put a checkbox next to it. And then every week I have what I call my executive meeting. And I have some points in there, like go through my notebook and bring all my to-dos into Asana, go through my phone's notes, things like that to process. And, it's always a whole thing. It's never like, oh, and now I'm done and I've completely done all the things, right? It's constant trying to corral the chaos. But I feel like I have a system in place now where if I have a good idea, I don't feel like it's going to get lost. And I love shower notes. They're really fun. They're these like waterproof notes that you can put on in your shower. And if you have someone else in your house, it's really fun to write notes back and forth or do little drawings.
And that's where you tend to get all your best ideas is in the shower. It's a great spot to also problem solve. So while we're on the concept of being organized and staying on top of things, thinking about outlining. What is it? Why should we do it? Or should we? Maybe we shouldn't. And some people are outliners, some aren't. And how should you do it?
I don't usually outline very much, and yeah, people do it. I usually do it toward the end, actually. I usually start with a free write and then I'll start to organize things into chapters. And then when I'm really editing down, I'll do an outline, which is just, for each paragraph, probably just one line of like, what is this paragraph about? And it really helps me decide if sentences are in the right place. Like, what is the point of this paragraph? And sometimes I'll do headlights outlining, which means if I'm working on a chapter, I'll just outline that chapter, like what's coming up, not the whole thing, but I'll just say like, okay, this chapter, this is going to happen, then this, then this, and this. And yeah, some people love it. Some people say you have to outline your whole book. That seems crazy. Last year, I did what I called my hot pile of garbage draft, which is something Kristen Arnett said. And it was literally just like a fleshed out outline. I had a lot of placeholders, like he says something funny here. She says something that indicates she's mad, blah, 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 and then this year I have to do my best guess first draft. So no like brackets with things inside. Like if she says a funny joke, like what's the funniest joke I can think of right now?
I can share some thoughts on outlining if that's all right with you.
Yeah, please do. What do you think?
I'm co-writing a book, which may seem odd, but I'm doing that with my sister. Or not a book, but a series. And I think there's something with ADHD and outlining. Because like you, I don't outline whatsoever. And she is very neurotypical and wants to have all of book 2 outlined from start to finish. Like what's every character in the book? What's the plot? Where are they going? Who's going where? And it felt chaotic and a little over the top. And we sat down in the room you see I'm in now. She came over, spent 3 or 4 days, and we spent about a day or two outlining. And we were able to get the book pretty much fully outlined. And not necessarily down to like chapters, but overall theme and content and characters and what they're going to be like, because we're introducing new ones in book 2. And it did feel really good at the end to have that on paper. But what maybe felt odd to her was it was all somewhat already rumbling around in my head. And for her, she wasn't able to see where it was all going. She needed to have it on the paper. So it seems like you may be able to effectively, you've got an outline rumbling around already in your head. And you kind of know where things are going. You just don't feel the need to put it on paper. Is that totally unreasonable, or does it feel like that sometimes?
I don't know. Writing my book is like the craziest thing I've ever done. It's just so weird and it's so slow and there's no like rhyme or reason. So I don't know. But I feel like with articles, I feel more natural. Like it almost reminded me of Queen's Gambit, where she like can picture the game. Like when I'm interviewing people and when I'm like doing research, I just start to put the article together in my mind.
Going back to that visualization we were talking about earlier in the episode, you're just able to visualize it. Instead of having to think it out and write it out, you can see the full story in your head and then say, okay, now I'm going to write it. I think it's actually, I could be wrong, but I think that is more rare than the other way. I think the average person would have to just write and then try to figure out how it goes, not be able to just sit there, stare off into space, and then start writing, start to finish and be finished and be comfortable with what they produced.
I do write kind of all over the place. I'll write one sentence and kind of build on that, and then another sentence and build on that. And then I'll have these kind of big blocks, and then I'll figure out how to put the blocks together.
Do you write best with electronic, like computer typewriter, or do you write best by hand?
I like writing by hand. It can feel very like calming. And I really like that you have to copy it out at least once. And so when I was doing between my second and third draft of my book, I made myself copy the entire book out. I typed it up. So I had it open on one screen and then I copied it over. And that was like such a great way. You want to talk about like any reason to cut anything. We're like, we don't need that. It's like typing it all over will make you definitely question everything.
It's a good idea. Write it out, retype it. Yeah, we've got to cut our word count down. It's too high for her. Okay. What's the book about?
Oh, my novel, Young Love Set Against the Dying Newspaper Industry. Young, dumb love. The kind of love that makes you a bad person.
Young, dumb love.
You can read it in 4 years, probably. That's my guess. Yeah, 4 years.
In 4 years, and then I'll watch it on Netflix. It'll be like a Nicholas Sparks wrote young, dumb love romance novel. All right. I'm jumping all around the book. I'm usually much more orderly, but we keep hitting on things that take us in different directions. You talk about a writer's secret. What is the writer's secret?
You have to give me a hint. The writer's secret?
It was something that had to do with hard work. I thought it was very much like the quote, hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That talent, that hard work and persistence are really the key. That it's not about just popping out as this genius. It's about creating and developing your talent.
And so none of us are just born this naturally gifted writer. We just get there by writing.
Some people are.
Some are. Yeah, it's true.
A few people are. And, I've really heard stories where it doesn't go that well for them. You kind of you gotta get your ego broken a little bit by the hard work. And if you don't, life itself, you can kind of become arrogant, and that's the easy route. And that's really great for those people. Some people are incredible geniuses, but you don't have to be an incredible genius to be a writer and to create genius work.
In some ways, it feels like being too much of a genius would get in the way of being a great writer. You may get in the habit of overthinking things.
Yeah. I wouldn't know about that. You'll have to interview a genius for that. But you can just be a regular person and be a writer with a commitment to learn and a commitment to work. And that's a really beautiful thing. I think you do need some raw talent, but it's so much less about the talent and so much more about the work than I thought when I didn't know any writers.
Yeah. And one thing I'm trying to, as I continue on with all the episodes of the pursuit of learning and just through life experience and reading, et cetera, the biggest takeaway that I have is everything in life's like that. Everyone looks at someone who's wrote a book on this or that, or they've done this or they've done that, and they just think that person did it. And what it really comes down to is just putting in the work. And eventually, after you put in enough and get lucky, and you're putting in the right work, so it can't just be the work, you have to be doing it right, put in enough time, get lucky, you end up with great results. And so mostly any of us can do it if we're willing to put in that time and effort and read the writer's life and listen to the conversation and then say, hey, I'm going to go away and try to do some of that stuff. That's one of my favorite sayings. It's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. And I was actually thinking of a blog post called A Simple Answer You're Not Going to Like.
Yes, exactly. I write that all the time. All of this is simple. I want to be skinnier. I know how. I just want to go eat some macaroni and cheese.
Yeah. And I was like, how do I finish my book? I'm so busy. And I'm just wake up at 5 a.m. I was like, I don't like that answer, but I really want to finish this. I want to call it a dumb book, this wonderful book that I love, that I'm blessed to be haunted by. And I started working out with a trainer during quarantine, and we just do squats for an hour. I don't like it that much. I complain the whole time. And, burpees, squats, nothing fancy. I did get a punching bag, which has been great, just like in the last month. I want to be healthy, and I want to be traveling. I want to be adventuring well into life. And if I sit down and watch TV for 5 hours a night, like the average person does in the US, then I'm probably going to be, recliner bound pretty soon. So do all the squats and whatnot.
You'll be like, I forget what movie it was, but they were in space and they were in the recliners. No, it wasn't Up, but that jumped in my head. It had the little robot. WALL-E? Was it WALL-E?
Oh, Wally made me so mad.
Yeah, and they were on the electronic cruise ship, and
I was like, why do I care about this robot so much? And like, I can't even make people care about my characters who are human people. And I was like, I'm like, we'll be devastated if anything happens to this robot. I was like, damn you, Pixar.
so you just brought me in a direction because you talk about this, right? Like the characters make the story. So how do we create characters that people want to read about?
I think it's people who want something. And one of my favorite pieces of advice is they don't have to be likable. They have to be followable. Like, what is this person going to do?
So you don't necessarily have to like them. You just have to think, wow, this is an interesting person. I want to know what's going on.
Olive Kitteridge, who's not a nice person, but you're like, what is this woman going to do?
And so other than, doing a lot of reading, which is the other half of writing, and saying, hey, I'm horrible, but like I'll use when I'm writing with my sister, I'll say, hey, this character here, like from a personality standpoint, I want you to picture this guy from this series that I read when I was like 12, right? And pick a specific person because for 31 years now, I've loved that person as almost like a Johnny Depp, Pirates of the Caribbean type person, and said, that's what this guy has to be like. So other than movies, TV, reading, what are some ways that people can conceptualize how they want to design a character?
I think people you've known, historical figures, bosses, roommates, siblings, if you're brave.
Can I share a fun one with you on that one? So my mother read our book, and she told me that there was one character that she just loved and one that she didn't quite like as much. And the one she loved was our brother, who my sister and I modeled him after. And we always joke that he's the favorite. And the one she liked less was somewhat modeled after me. So it was such a fun experience, test out who your mom and dad really have as their favorites. Is you base it on the siblings and then get them to give a read of the book. It was just earlier this summer, actually. So the other key thing, we've got characters, we're looking at what we've read, we're looking at people in our lives. One of the things that people get challenged by when they're trying to write their novel is dialogue. Why is it so easy to have bad dialogue, and how can we improve the dialogue process?
I think bad dialogue happens because, one, people think it's talking and you have to have it be like a conversation, and it's not really. You don't have to be like, hi, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't have to include all that. And two, people try to relay information in dialogue also often that comes across as fake, because in real life, we don't tell each other things we already know. I'm not like, Clint, here we are on your podcast. Like, we don't say that. And people try to use dialogue as an info dump in that way.
So a couple key things you can avoid. You can just enter partway through the conversation, and you can leave the dialogue before they're done the conversation.
Yeah, and just don't have one character tell another character something that character already knows.
Yeah, an example that I think you gave in the book was me saying, Paulette, but we have to be home because remember, Dad will get mad if we're not there by sundown. So no one's going to say that to their sibling. They both just know it.
Yeah. And I think mixing in gestures and physicality with dialogue really helps. And then also, like, one of my goals for me is that you could see a line of dialogue without attribution and know who said it, which is a really big challenge. Like, I'm probably not going to get to that level, but in general, I have two funny, it's a love triangle, but both the women this guy is involved with are funny. And I'm like, I have to have it like, this character is sarcastic funny. This other character is gross funny and outrageous funny, right? So like their jokes would never cross. You would never get confused about whose joke this was.
Yes, you read it and you automatically know which character it is.
Yeah. So, they all have to talk very differently.
Okay. And so you almost try to put a voice to that character and then ensure that your writing of that character stays consistent to the voice you created, almost like we were talking about earlier with the visualization. It's like, okay, well, if this was a Netflix show, how would this person talk? And hence, how do I want to write them? Speaking of voice, how do we as a writer find our own unique voice that helps us stand out from the other million writers that are out there?
I think it's really about honing the voice that's already inside you. It's not something you're going to find. It's when you stop writing like how you think you should be writing or how someone you admire writes, which is really hard. And it takes a long time, and you just kind of have to keep practicing and reading and seeing what you like. And, I remember when I was reading Chuck Klosterman and he wrote anyway in the beginning of a paragraph, just all caps. And I was like, what? You're allowed to do that? Like, that's something silly that I would do with my friends, And so kind of just realizing when you read writers, like how many ways in which you can break the rules. And you're like, oh, cool. You don't have to pay attention to any of this stuff. You can do whatever you want, really. And that can be so fun. And then when you do something when you're like, oh, that really like pleases me, or that sounds like me. When people start to say, I could really hear you on the page, that feels really good.
I can really hear you because it aligns with your distinct writing voice. Okay. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, when you talked about that sentence, the anyway sentence, it was also where you were talking a bit about taking risks with your writing, and you had a quote from Brene Brown who said that vulnerability is basically uncertainty, risk, and exposure. Can you tell me, what does that mean to you, and how can that help the listeners in their writing?
It's a vulnerable act, writing. You're saying, hey, here are my insides. What do you think? And so many people spend a lot of time and effort covering their insides up and trying to look like they have it all together. And writing is just about the opposite of that. So I think it's really important to know that it doesn't feel great all the time. It can feel really scary, but it's worth it because that's the way that you get connection.
Is by pushing through the fear and being open and being vulnerable and sharing not just the rosy picture, but the full story.
Totally. Yeah. Which I'm all about, which is why I put all my rejections on Instagram.
I'm not looking forward to that part of it, but so be it. If I have to be self-published in a certain amount of time, that will be the plan. What's the right number of rejections? Like, if you're saying, hey, I'm willing to get X number of rejections before I just publish it myself, like, what's a reasonable amount of pain to go through before you just say, I'm going to publish? And yeah, a novel. Okay, 150. I'm going to write that down and put a circle around it. 150. Okay. And then just throw them. But you raised something. I hadn't even thought about this. Let's say I put out 10 at a time and I wait a month and then I put out another 10. If someone accepts it somewhere in there, I ought to then send a note to all the ones that I haven't heard back from just to say, hey, by the way, withdrawing this, so they, as a level of professionalism.
Yes. You say this was picked up elsewhere, like, thank you for your consideration, but I'm going to withdraw this story. And there is a tool called Submittable, which many publications take their submissions through. That makes it very easy. It's a click of a button.
Yeah, we're just finishing the query right now. We're working with a query editor, which is fun. So one of the important things for writing is flow. So a 3-part question for you on this one. What is flow? How do we recognize when we're in it? And how can we proactively get ourselves into flow?
So flow is a condition that was recognized by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote a book of the same name. He also wrote Creativity, which is a great book. And it's really those moments where it feels like time just passes like nothing. And there's a few conditions that help you get there. And, he says that really the key to a happy life is filling your life with as many of those experiences as you can, because they're really when you are present, when you're centered, and you're just in it. And one thing that helps is to really just know what you're doing, to have kind of instructions for yourself to say, hey, I'm just going to free write right now. And to kind of be on the edge of your ability, right? Not to be like, I'm trying to do something that's super hard and I feel like giving up, and not like, oh, this is so easy, but just right on that edge, surfing the edge.
So you're not going well past your boundaries, but you're pushing them. When the question that you tend to get a lot from new writers is, where do I get ideas from? And what do you usually suggest to them?
Reading and living and writing. And so I think with reading, reading widely, reading different things, not just the genre that you usually stick to, living, having adventures, doing something different, not just sitting around and watching TV, traveling, and really having relationships. And then writing, I think writing about your life, free writing, seeing what you kind of keep coming back to and what you're clearly obsessed with. You'll kind of find out what sparks. And, the reading and the living are really feeding you ideas. And through reading, you can see what other writers have written, and your writing becomes a kind of response to that.
So you're incorporating the reading of other writers to start to, you find what you love in bits and pieces here and there, and that starts to help find your voice. And then the ideas are coming from not only the books you've read, but also what you experience in your life and the school, the environment, the people. And so try to live as full a life as possible to give you inspiration. And then you may not feel like you have inspiration, but by forcing yourself to do your morning pages or to just put pen to paper, you'll be surprised that ideas do come.
A writing assignment is read something and then pretend that you have to write a response and just write something, right? Someone writes a short story about their first date. Write a short story about your first date. There's room, right? There's room for all of these. I just actually today found out my novel is set in the last year a newspaper is functioning. And my friend today said, or someone in a very important meeting said, have you read The Imperfectionist? And I was like, no. And she's like, it takes place in the last year a newspaper is functioning. And I was like, oh my God. I just felt this like burning kind of like embarrassed, panicky heat. And I was like, oh my God. And then I read a description of the book and I'm like, okay, that's totally different from my book, right? So like even that level of specificity that made me very uncomfortable at first, there's so much room for all different kinds of works. So yeah, so take a theme, take a point of view, take the character arc and say, okay, what was the thing that broke my last shred of hope for a period of my life, if that's what happens in a piece.
Was your very next question to her, is there a love triangle?
Is there a love triangle? Probably. There's a love triangle in every book.
Be like, there's a love triangle in every good story, which is why Bachelor in Paradise is one of the best television shows of all time. You have 10 steps to make any work better, and I found they were very powerful. Can you share some of those with our listeners? And where do you tend to see writers falling down as it relates to those? We don't have to go through the full list of 10, but what are some of your favorites?
One of my favorite quotes about writing came from one of my coaching students, and she said, I can't believe how much work I put into something I already put so much work into. And I was like, welcome to the writer's life for sure. So, you'll often come to a place where you're like, oh my God, what do I do with this piece? It's not moving along. And, you want to let it sit for a while. It's good to walk away from something for, I think, like 2 weeks is a nice period. The longer the piece is, the longer you want to step away from it. If I finish my novel draft this year, I'd like to 2 months off, I think, and then come back to it. Another thing that works really well is reading it out loud. That's kind of magical. I have my coaching students read their work out loud, and I look at it we look at it together on a Google Doc and they read it out loud because it's such a good habit to get into and people just should get used to doing that. Feels a little weird at first, but and then copying it over, right, really, really helps.
I love that copying it over one. That is definitely.
Just print it out and then type it into your computer again. And just open the file. Claire Dieter jokes about that all the time. She's like, open the file.
I can't imagine, though, if you're at roughly, let's say, 120,000 words, rewriting it all by hand.
Well, I would print it out and like type it back in. I wouldn't I'll do that. My next draft of my novel, I will do that.
Because when just the act of reading it while you're typing it, you're saying, oh, I don't think I need that, and cut.
Because it has to you can't skim over it at that point. It has to go in your brain and out your hands. And so it definitely goes through the process. And if there's anything you don't have to type, you're going to be like, I don't want to type that. That's not good enough to type. I'm tired of typing. I don't want to type this whole thing out. It makes you lazy. And so you only will bring out the best pieces.
You're bringing up such a vivid reminder. It's a bit lame that it's at work a couple times a year. I write a business report for the company, kind of saying how everything's doing for a shareholder package. And I write most of it by hand, and then one of my colleagues helps me by typing it all up, then gives it back to me, leave it for a day, get back in there, work on it all by hand. They type it up again, and we'll probably go through 7 or 8 drafts of that. But it's always typed and then seeing it and saying, no, that could be better. But the can be better almost always has to be with a pen. Can never be, I'll just go in and edit the Word doc because something just doesn't flow. Okay.
Yeah, there is something about printing. Get a printer. If you're a writer, just get a printer. You should have one. They're not that expensive. Just do it.
Yeah, we have one here. It doesn't work very well. I think we're going to just get a new one and not tell my wife. Can I throw a last one at you? Know when to show and when to tell. How does that work?
Yeah, we say show, don't tell, and it's non-sustainable. If you look at a book, any book, a lot of stuff is told. And if you only show things, it's going to take a long time to get where you want to go. And so you really want to show during the most dramatic times. But when you're doing summary, you're probably going to have some telling, and that's okay. And I hate that we say show, don't tell because people obsess about it. And the more you can show, the better. It's great, rather than being like, hey, Jimmy, we have to get back at 9. It's like, he looks at his phone and sees the stopwatch counting down that he had set on his phone that was labeled time to get home, something like that. And we, as readers, love that joy of the 2 and the 2 and making the connection that it's 4 rather than just being given 4. So providing enough of that for your readers because we do love it, but it's not 100% showing. That's not sustainable.
Okay. So you have to mix in the 2. One more, because we talked a little bit about it, because you were talking about your Twitter. And this is maybe interesting for our listeners who want to write. You talk about the importance of your social media profile as it relates to being a writer. So why is social media profile important? And what are some tips and tricks for people to work on having a better social media profile?
It's so hard because it's such an asset and such a detriment because I get as addicted to it as anyone else and I struggle with it nonstop. But my friend, Sarah Runnels, who has an account OMG SKR, she's hilarious and just puts screenshots of her tweets on Instagram and has gotten more than 50,000 followers and just had an editor from a major magazine reach out to her and say, hey, you're really funny. You should pitch us. It's just that social media is where editors are. On Twitter, especially, I had one time the New York Times reached out to me over Twitter because I was writing about personal finance and art. And it was someone who did this section called Show Us Your Walls about people's art. And she's like, we don't just want to have millionaires on here. We want people who from all levels. And I really like how you talk about finances and art, and would you like to write a story for us? And I was like, I never in a million years would have thought you would get an assignment for the New York Times on Twitter. And, that wasn't my first time being published there. So she had seen me through that somehow. But, tweeting is writing. It's not our 100% best work, but it's still writing. It's still reading. It's at this very small level. It's a very particular form of it. But you can give people these free samples of what you're all about. And if you want to make a living off writing, I had this lesson when the pandemic first hit and I lost pretty much all of my work in a month and a half. And I went to Twitter and I said, hey, I'm one of the writers who lost all their work. 11 people retweeted it of my, few thousand followers, and my calendar filled back up again. And I was like, wow, okay, damn, right? It's your community. And it can be terrible in so many ways. Like if I want to wear a low cut dress and all the makeup I can manage and face tune myself and airbrush my thighs in a short dress and just take sexy photos of myself all day long, like I would have a lot more followers, and I should probably do that. But as of now, I haven't. And so it is like there's these ways in which it can feel like you can fall into this creepy Black Mirror game of it, and you have to be careful of that. It's very powerful. It's very strange. And you just have to make sure that like you're in charge of it and it's not in charge of you. And I probably wake up like every 2 weeks and I'm like, it's in charge of me. I think especially because of the ADHD. So I've used the Freedom app before. I was taking a break earlier this year and I was so much happier, and then it sucked me back in. There's getting, social media management help, all that.
Which seems like a great idea. Yeah. It can become a lot to manage when you're already trying to do all the things you're trying to do. You're trying to write for 2 hours, you're trying to read for 2 hours, you're trying to run a business. And now it's like, hey, by the way, grow your following. And you're like, oh, I read how to do that. And it's like 5 hours a day.
Yeah, for sure.
That doesn't make any sense. Is there anything that we didn't cover in this very sporadic ADHD-driven conversation driven by me? Anything we didn't cover that you want to get across to the listeners?
I think my joke is that death is my only boss. And I had a really early experience with mortality. And that's really, I am as in denial about it ultimately as the rest of us. But really all we have is the time we spend here and what we do. And it's hard to see the opportunity cost of being a writer. My friends have nice homes at this point, and I rent a room in a nice home, though I have faith that I will make more money in the future. And I would have made more money by now if I wasn't such a something until I was about 28. I was pretty lazy and entitled. So it's just about enjoying it. And we live in a very dystopian society. And so it's really about finding that which feels real to you and really living your life. I think your life is kind of your ultimate work of art.
It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for joining me on the pursuit of learning. I learned a tremendous amount by reading your book, Welcome to the Writer's Life, How to Design Your Writing Craft, and by having a conversation with you. And I look forward to having my sister listen and read the book and then creating a writing habit together.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the pursuit of learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.